And I wanted to, first of all, give a huge welcome to all of you for attending this webinar today. I'm sure there'll be more, normally more will join us during the session as well. But I'm also very privileged to introduce you today, Eddy Canfor-Dumas, a man I have immense respect for, who's going to talk to us today about demystifying dialogue, the art of creative conversation. And just a little bit about Eddy up front first before we start. And that is that I think it's fair to say that, and Eddy will probably be horrified by me saying this, but it's probably fair to say that Eddy is a master of the written and the spoken word. So he read English at New College, Oxford, and to date he's had a full and very fascinating working life. He has variously been a comedy writer and performer. He's written books. He has also been a script writer for television, writing scripts for things like the UK police procedurals, The Bill, Kavanagh QC, A Tough Love, and also BBC drama programmes, the outstanding Pompeii, The Last Days, and Super Volcano, which were truly amazing productions. He's also a novelist, and he was a key advisor to the Ministry of Defence when I first met Eddy. He was part of the Chief of the Defence Staff Strategy Forum as an advisor there. And he was also very heavily involved in the MOD's approach to developing ideas on understanding conflict prevention and dialogue. So it's with huge privilege to introduce Eddy to you today. And we really look forward to hearing Eddy's view on the art of creative conversation. So Eddy, over to you, my friend.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that glowing introduction. And I'm very privileged to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Just make sure that, can everybody see that slide? Yes?
Yeah, all good.
Great. So, demystifying dialogue. Why demystifying? Well, dialogue is one of these words like peace, God, love, which is in common usage, but is used by different people in different ways in different contexts. And it has a kind of sort of higher order meaning that I think can put people off a little bit. So this is why there is the title Demystifying Dialogue. And I'm going to talk more about the art of creative conversation as we go. So there are 4 parts to this talk. What is dialogue? From drama to conflict, as Ian described, I have an unusual career trajectory, going from being a drama writer to working in conflict management. I'm going to explain what creative conversation is, and then at the end, there will be time, I hope, for a discussion. So, getting straight into it, what is dialogue? Dialogue comes from the Greek word dialogos, meaning through word or through words. And historically, it's associated with these 2 giants of philosophy, Socrates and Plato. Socrates used what was known as a dialogic method in teaching. This was a way of sort of deconstructing people's assumptions through asking them questions. Socrates never actually wrote anything down, and what we know of Socrates is through works by people like Plato, who was his immediate disciple, and the various others of his contemporaries. So dialogue has a history really of being associated with a Greek philosophy, but it's moved on a lot since then. So there are different related meanings, and they overlap a lot. So dialogue is used as a tool. It's used in social action. It's used with the spirit of inquiry, which is really how Socrates and Plato used it. It's used as a form of relationship, and it even has a kind of sacred meaning, or it moves into the mystic or the mystical. And I'm going to deconstruct or unpack each of those in turn. But as I say, Nothing I say is definitive, and a lot of these things overlap in one way or another. So I expect most people here know of dialogue as a tool for solving problems, building consensus, and resolving conflict. It is normally, in this setting, conducted by an expert, a mediator, a facilitator of some sort, as a way of helping people who are in some sort of disagreement or conflict or dispute come together to build trust, reduce misunderstanding, and hopefully co-create some kind of agreement or way forward. So you see this in mediation, diplomacy, facilitation of one sort in all sorts of different settings. I, for example, am a member of the Green Party in the United Kingdom, and I'm on the mediation panel there. So I help to, or try to help disputes within the party between members. So even though we're all supposedly on the same side, we can still fall out. So Desmond Tutu very famously said, if you want peace, don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies. And dialogue is essentially the tool by which you do that. So moving out, and as we go through these, you'll see that there's a sort of a progressive widening of the understanding and use of dialogue. Dialogue is also used as a form of social action. So this is really to include people in trying to create a way forward for disparate groups. So it's not just about speaking, but it's about who gets heard. So dialogue seeks to repair injustice, bridge divides, and rehumanize the other, or even simply include the other. So it's essentially an egalitarian way of affirming the dignity of everyone involved, especially those who need to be brought in from the margins. And it's seen, for example, in peace building, reconciliation, maybe the prevention of violent conflict. So I'll be touching on Understand to Prevent, the work I did with Ian a little later. And I'm actually also now involved in something in the northeast of England, which uses dialogue in this context as social action. So Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General, famously said, building sustainable peace requires not only agreements on paper, but dialogue in practice at every level of society. So dialogue is seen as a form of social glue in this context. So coming now, broadening out, not looking at a specific problem, returning in fact to the understanding of dialogue as perhaps first conceived by Socrates. This is a shared search for mutual understanding, a process of thinking, exploring, and journeying together. And whereas dialogue as social action and dialogue as a tool might need a facilitator at the heart of it, at the heart of that process, dialogue as inquiry is often something that is unmediated. It might be mediated, but two people can sit down and decide that they're going to have a dialogue with this spirit of openness, flexibility, generosity to the other, not trying to convince each other of their positions, but building on what each other says in the search for some greater understanding, some greater truth. So it's often seen in philosophical and spiritual settings. Sometimes you get it in politics. Often you get this when politicians retire because they're no longer in the game and they can afford to be more generous perhaps to their political opponents than they were when they were active as politicians. But that's quite rare because politics is about the exercise or trying to win power. So Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor, said this quotation, which I like very much. He said, "The essential questions have no answers. You are my question and I am yours, and then there is dialogue." So dialogue is seen as a way for people to try to come to a greater understanding of each other, themselves, and some greater question. Putting out, again, we get to something which is starting to get a little abstract, but nevertheless, it's very real for people who live like this. And this is a dialogue as a relationship, or dialogue that gives meaning. And this really even starts to go beyond words. So it's a way of being in the world that deeply informs one's thoughts and action. And it's underpinned by ideas of interdependence and oneness. So Martin Buber, another Jewish philosopher, very famously said, all real living is meeting. So in his mind, the encounter, the full encounter of one human being with another, human beings who are open to change, is a form of dialogue. And it can happen without words. Daisaku Ikeda, who's a Buddhist, died a few years ago, great proponent of dialogue, talks about it as the ultimate constructive undertaking of the human spirit. But he also talked very poetically about dialogues with nature, dialogues with the cosmos, dialogues with literature. So this is, obviously, this is not something that is strictly speaking through words, dialogus, but this is about one's spirit or oneself being in some kind of communion with something greater than oneself. And David Bohm, who was a quantum physicist, talks, he's written a lot about dialogue, and at one end it's very practical about people talking to each other, but in its greatest manifestation, sort of individuals disappear, and the dialogue is simply the process, the flow of meaning between individuals. So we started from dialogue as a tool, form of social action, spirit of inquiry, into this dialogue as relationship. So we can think about this divergent sense of dialogue. However, as a former scriptwriter, my understanding initially of dialogue was rather more mundane, which is dialogues is what characters say in a drama or in fiction. And so dialogue is something that you write. And this is relevant, I think, certainly is relevant to the development of my thought, because what you learn as a scriptwriter is how incredibly plastic dialogue is, how malleable it is. There's an old joke in the scriptwriting business that scripts aren't written, they're rewritten. You just hope that they're rewritten by you, the original scriptwriter. But in writing a scene, acting as God in this scene, you become very aware of how changing the flow of dialogue, changing a single word, can change the complete nature of a scene. You can drop a word in as a hand grenade and everything goes off in a different direction. And this might not seem particularly relevant to the forms of dialogue I was talking about earlier, but I actually think it is absolutely central, because one of the things that I'd like to suggest to you today is that dialogue actually is nothing special. It can be special, but if you recast it as creative conversation, you can turn it into something much more useful in your daily life and in heightened situations. So as Ian said, I wrote all sorts of drama for about 20 years. And this is looking back through the past, and I don't expect anybody to recognize any of these. But my work was mainly with coppers and lawyers. So that's the Bill, Tough, Low and Cavendish QC. But after, well, in 2003, I wrote this thing called Pompeii, the Last Day. And then I went on to write about a bigger volcano, supervolcano, about Yellowstone National Park erupting. Yellowstone is actually a dormant supervolcano. It has a great marketing line here. This is a true story. It just hasn't happened yet, because everything was based on meticulous research on the science. But interestingly, towards the end of my time writing for television, I became a go-to for TV disaster movies. We followed this up with something called Superstorm, about a hurricane hitting New York. And the brief was always the same. It was, we want you to end the world, but please end it with hope. So the reason why this happened was this. This is, of course, the attack on the Twin Towers in 2001. A shocking event that changed everything in an instant, just like the eruption of Vesuvius changed everything in an instant. This is relevant for me because it was a turning point when I realized that I needed to get out more. I was sitting in this very chair when my wife called up the stairs on 9/11 that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. I thought that it was a pilot of a Cessna had had a heart attack or something. 20 minutes later, she said, I think you should turn on the television because another plane has flown into the World Trade Center. So I walked across a few feet to the television in the room next door, and I watched the Twin Towers come down in real time. And I realized during that I didn't know why this had happened. I didn't know why these people were so angry. They were Muslims, but I didn't know any Muslims to ask about anything. And I realized I had to get out more. I was living in a sort of TV bubble. And that took me on a journey that eventually led to the Houses of Parliament, where I was instrumental in setting up an all-party parliamentary group. This is parliamentarians from both the Houses of Commons and House of Lords, of all parties, coming together to talk about conflict and how to deal with conflict in non-violent ways. So this was against the background of the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and seeing those campaigns not going to plan. As an all-party group, we have the ability, the drawing power, to be able to invite anybody to come to talk to us, to talk to parliamentarians. So we had, for example, Johan Galtung came to talk to us, great luminary in peace studies. We had Gene Sharp, who wrote classic works on nonviolent revolution. We had Marshall Rosenberg, the founder of nonviolent communication. George Shultz came to talk to us, and all sorts of people in between. We also, at my initiative, invited the Brighton bomber, Pat McGee, and Jo Berry, the daughter of Sir Anthony Berry, who died in the Brighton bomb, to come to talk to us on the 25th anniversary of the Brighton bombing. That was extremely controversial and gained worldwide coverage. But he was there and he explained himself to a room full of mainly angry Conservative MPs. And it was a very powerful meeting. That ran for 10 years. And the key connection here is that as a dramatist, your job really is to create conflict in your scripts, because conflict is very compelling for an audience. And people want to see how things turn out. But you can reverse that and start to see actually that you can start to deconstruct conflict, real conflicts, using the dramatist's eye. Anyway, towards the end of the time of the all-party group, I received a telephone call out of the blue from a lieutenant colonel in the British Army, inviting me to come to a conference on this initiative called Understand to Prevent, the military contribution to the prevention of violent conflict. And that one invitation turned out to be 5 years of work, because I was able to contribute the understanding that I had gained from having a front row seat at all of these meetings and Houses of Parliament, and feed them into this joint military civil initiative, which was published in 2017. The idea was initially, and Ian might correct me here, that this would become doctrine for the British Armed Forces. But unfortunately, during the project, Vladimir Putin decided to annex Crimea, and the focus of the Ministry of Defense turned away from learning the lessons of what had gone wrong in Afghanistan and Iraq, and focusing again on what they said was the real enemy, Russia. The Russian bear was back. But nevertheless, the project was concluded and produced this comprehensive handbook on how to use all of the tools of non-violence to try to prevent violent conflict. And it'll perhaps come as no surprise to hear that at the end of this this long process working on Understand to Prevent, I came to the conclusion that in the end, it all comes down to people talking to each other. But crucially, it's not just people talking to each other, it's how people talk to each other that was really very important. And this led to me working with my very good friend, Peter Osborne, who's an expert in this field, on the nuts and bolts of how you, in daily life, can create the most value from talking and listening to each other. So this is a line from the book. We've had a revolution in the technology that connects us, in the hardware and the software. Now we need a revolution in the humanware, in the quality of how we actually communicate with each other one-to-one. So this is a reduction of everything we talk about, that fundamentally communication and relationship, how we relate to each other, is all about the connection, the quality of connection. And that the thing that we have most control over is how we communicate. So the nature of a relationship will change very much on how you talk to the other person, how you listen to the other person. And fundamentally, what you're looking at is whether or not you, or the degree to which you are connected. So the humanware that we have is hit or miss, because we learn to talk as we grow up, but we don't learn how to have productive conversations, how to communicate in the best possible way, particularly how to listen to understand each other. So fundamentally, what we did in this book is we took the spirit of dialogue and we've called it creative conversation to make it more accessible. Because quite honestly, in my long life, I've had what I would say very many great conversations with people, but I would never call them dialogues. So conversation is to my mind, a word that is sort of less intimidating than dialogue. So what is creative conversation? Well, it's a form of personal communication that strives to improve the quality of human connection. It consciously seeks to create value in every exchange. And the key thing is that it consists of skills that one can learn and practice. Here, I'll just go through them quickly. But doing any of these things, even one of them, will definitely improve the nature of your communication with others, and therefore how the nature of your relationship with them. So the first and key thing is to understand first, understand to prevent. So this means that you are in the default mode in not in every conversation, but in conversations perhaps that matter, where you understand, you know the value of understanding, because if you put yourself at the service of someone else, you build connection with them and trust. My colleague Peter tells the story often in our workshops of a workshop he did where we have a 5-minute conversation where we put people into pairs. We tell one of them that you are the understander in this conversation. You stick in that role. You don't give advice. You don't problem solve. You don't give an opinion. You simply show that you understand what the other person is saying. The other person is the teller. They want to be understood. And in 5 minutes, you say, find something to talk about. And at the end of it, the understander summarizes what they've understood. So in this particular workshop, they went through this exercise, takes 5 minutes. And at the end of it, one of the pair of two women got up in tears and rushed out of the room. She came back a few minutes later and said, I'm terribly sorry, but during this exercise, I realized that this complete stranger has paid me the sort of attention and listened to me with the care that my husband of 17 years has never shown me, which I found terribly upsetting. They were talking about whether or not it's better to have carpet or hardware floor in your dining room. So the power of understanding really isn't often about the subject. It's about the fact that someone else is giving you that care, that attention. And it's incredibly powerful. There are specific skills in understanding that I could go into, but we haven't really got time. To be understood, this is the other side of the coin. There are skills that you can deploy to make sure that you are being understood by the other person. Even if you don't entirely understand what it is you want to say, you can recruit them to help you be understood. So one of the key things is you headline what you say. So you might say, for example, I want to talk about my career, but I'm not sure about X, Y, and Z, and I'd like you to be a sounding board. So that sets up the parameters of that conversation, and then you work backwards and forwards. And then at the end, just as the other person, the understander, might summarize, you might ask them to summarize, to check that you have been understood. So these two key roles of understanding and being understood are the absolute fundamentals of creative conversation. And whereas people often talk about active listening, we talk about active understanding, because you can actively listen with all kinds of different intentions. But the power of showing that you want to understand somebody, the power of being understood, fulfills a fundamental human need. Taking ownership. we all have more power than we know to affect our relationships. We're affecting them all the time anyway. But to understand that we are, each of us, at the center of a unique web of relationships, and that if we change the way that we talk and listen, we understand and are understood with other people, we have that within our power. But if we take that decision, we can change all of those relationships, or certainly all of the relationships that are open to change, because we're quite realistic in understanding that some people have fallen out and they will never talk again. Although I have to say that before I knew anything about this, I'd fallen out with my father very big time, but I decided that I was going to repair that relationship. It took 7 years of trial and error. So with determination, you can often create positive change, even in relationships that seem to have become completely estranged. But taking ownership is, again, absolutely fundamental to create a conversation, because you understand that by changing yourself, you automatically change the relationships with the people around you. Staying open. Why is it that we are open to some ideas, some people, some ideologies, principles, whatever, and we are closed to others? We do an exercise called I Love It When, I Hate It When. We ask people to list or shout out things that they love and hate people doing when they're talking to them. And people say things like, I hate it when somebody ignores me, somebody looks over my shoulder, somebody's looking at the phone when they're talking to me. I hate it when people don't let me get a word in edgeways. There's a whole long list of things that people hate. On the other side of the coin, I love it when we have a laugh together. I love it when we take turns. I love it when somebody really listens to me, somebody shows that they understand me. I love it when I can help someone in, whatever. There's a whole list. And key to all of this is that the loves are about basic human needs being met, and the hates are about basic human needs not being met. So when our need for understanding, our need for respect, our need to be seen, to be heard, our need for trust, all of these things are met, we feel positive. On the other hand, when those needs are not met, we feel negative. So again, just understanding the human needs that are driving conversation and are driving us, the golden sort of the hidden hand, is a great way of opening up this the ownership. It gives you more control, more possibilities. These needs, once you become aware of how needs drive things, meeting needs, either through the conversation or in the conversation, again, creates value. So we work on the principle, Peter and I, that people consciously or unconsciously move towards people, situations, and environments in which their needs are met. And they move away from people, situations, and environments in which their needs aren't met. And if their needs are not being met and they can't move, they suffer. So again, understanding human needs and being able to stay open to listen, to hear what others are saying is a great skill, but it needs practice. As does the idea of challenging. So you've understood, you've checked your understanding, you've built some rapport with the other person, but you just don't agree. There's something that you need to challenge in what they say. So how can you challenge in a way that doesn't alienate them, that keeps the conversation open and flowing, that might even deepen a relationship? Well, there are skills involved there. Similarly, if you are being challenged, we know when we are challenged, we tend to become defensive. How can we not become defensive? Be open to challenge and respond in the most productive way. So there are skills there. And finally, being prepared. Life has a way of ambushing us, where somebody suddenly says something and we're not prepared to be our best selves. So how can we recover as quickly as possible if we if we don't use the habits of creative conversation? How can we be prepared for opportunities that arise? Something comes up and you think, oh, well, actually, I rather than drawing back, I could push forward into this conversation. How do you prepare for really difficult conversations? These are all things that can be skills that can be learned and practiced. So these are the 7 habits of creative conversation. They're written in our book, and they're being applied by us currently in a piece of work that's funded by the government. Last summer, there were violent disturbances after the brutal murder of 3 young girls in Southport in northwest England. And there are a lot of fractured communities, or communities with tension underlying. We, Centre for Creative Conversation, have been invited to take part in this program, in fact, to co-create it. We've started working in Newcastle in the summer. We will be working in Middlesbrough, which is another large centre in the northeast of England, soon. Various other communities where people are worried about the divisions that have been festering underneath the surface that are now coming to the fore. So we're using creative conversation, and we're using fundamentally creative conversation, dialogue for social action. So this is not theory. This is something that is actually going on and helping people right now. So much more on our website, the Centre of Creative Conversation. I've given you a quick rush through. And now, final part, it says discussion. It shouldn't say discussion, really. It should say conversation. So I will stop sharing. I hope you're still there when behind the screen emerges. So, without drawing breath.
Any questions, Eddy? Please, let's start the conversation going. Eddy, how do you think, based on the techniques you've developed and that 7 approach, how would you assess your kind of the receptivity of that approach to people? So when you're doing your training, how receptive are people to that approach?
Well, I mean, of course, I'm blowing my own trumpet here, but they are incredibly receptive, because we encourage people to practice on the small stuff. These are skills that are transferable to any setting. So, people will say, well, I'm here, my community is at loggerheads with this community, but I'm just getting on so much better with my husband or my daughter or my next door neighbor, because the same fundamental dynamics are at work. So dialogue is often thought of as something special that you use in these rather heightened situations, rather than something by calling it conversation, we want to say, actually, this is demotic. This is something that you can use in the everyday. And by practicing on the small stuff, you have those skills more available when big things come along. But if you go to our website, we've got videos of people saying very nice things about,
Thanks,
about
Eddie.
this.
Zara, you've been waiting very patiently.
Yes, thank you, Ian. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. Hello, Mr. Dumas. My name is Zara. I'm a mediator.
Eddie.
Oh, sorry, Eddie. It's a cultural
Yeah.
thing. I'm from the Middle East.
Okay.
So I am a mediator and also a law student at King's College London. But something I've been dabbling on lately is trying to write cases to some students I've been teaching mediation to. And one of the things I've been struggling with, as you said in yours, is having to write conflict in a script or in a case. So how would you say tools or maybe tips to maybe help myself overcome this, you know? How do you write a conflict in a case or a script, a fictional one, obviously?
Right. So again, to try to understand. So I mean, you're talking about literally how you put it on the page.
No, in general, how do you create a conflict? Because I feel like ever since becoming a mediator, I always pry away from conflict and look through ways to solve it.
Right.
So my mind is like unable to create a conflict, even though it was a fake scenario per se.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I've done based on my my work as a scriptwriter is come up with my own definition of what conflict is, which in my words is the disturbance that arises when people perceive that something they care about is being threatened or denied. Right? So you can and so the conflict can arise between people. It often arises within somebody. You know, they don't know what to do, or you know, they have differing needs that are in conflict with each other. Again, whether their perception of what is being threatened or denied is, whether it's right or not, in a way, doesn't matter, because they'll still be in conflict. So you can start at any one of those elements. You can start with the disturbance. You can start with what people care about. You can start with what needs are underlying these. You can start with their perception of threat or what is being denied. So really, it starts with the individual.
Yeah, to summarize, there's like an obvious legal positions, and behind those is maybe needs and interest at jeopardy.
Yeah, needs, interest, jeopardy, and lots of emotion.
Yeah.
Because the emotion tends to cloud
Yeah.
cloud everything else.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Good luck.
Eddie, in the chat, there's one question here from Jane, but we'll go in this order. So Jane first, then Barbara, then Ole. So Jane has said, how can one become an expert in dialogue professionally? I know you'll take issue with that word in a minute. Any associations and sought after certifications? What do governments look for when searching for a facilitator for high level conflict dialogues? So how, for example, would they select you? Now, I think one thing I would say here is, just before I hand it to you, is that Jane, I think Eddie made a really excellent point at the beginning. I find that when I talk about dialogue, I tend to think of dialogue as something which is at a very high level. So for me, dialogue is like intergovernmental, you know, it's a formal process is the way I look at it. And I actually prefer Eddie's framing of the conversation for most things below that. But in terms of qualifications, Eddie, over to you. How do you get selected for the cases that you're working on, for example?
Well, I'm afraid there's no clear strategy, because I mean, fundamentally, it all comes down to who you know, as far as I can see. We're through this this community bridge builders program, because the money came from the government, but it came to Newcastle City Council. Newcastle City Council were looking for people to do something. We didn't know, it just had this sort of community cohesion budget. They turned to somebody that they knew very well, because he had worked for them and had been a community mediator, and he was now an academic at Durham University. And it just so happened that we had a few weeks before met this person and got on incredibly well. We had a whole series of creative conversations. He'd looked at our methodology, and he said, "Do you want to work together?" So yes, we wanted to work together. I mean, the call that came from Ian's crew, came out of the blue. And apparently this lieutenant colonel had simply been Googling, and he'd come across the all-party parliamentary group on conflict issues. And, the door opens. So whatever qualifications you have, both on paper and in experience, in the end, you have to be an individual who is trusted by the people who are involved, or if not directly, that is trusted by somebody who is trusted. So it really is about relationships. We have a saying, life is relationships, the rest is details. It's not something, we found that quotation, but fundamentally, it's all about building relationships and building trust with people. And as far as I can see, there's no shortcut to any of that.
Thanks, Eddy. Barbara, over to you. You've been very patient.
Yes. Hello, Eddy. I'm Barbara. I'm calling in from Cape Town. I've got the evening sun on my face, so I'm sitting in a very philosophical mood. Thank you very much for tickling my brain cells this evening. I really enjoyed following your argumentation through dialogue and conversation. So I'd like to go back to the origin of its word, as you explained, dialogos through word. And then we're looking at conversation, which we could derive from maybe moving in together or, crossing over. So I'd love to hear your thought about how you define conversation so that it doesn't only include the word. Because for me, it almost feels like an underlying distinction you're making is between dialogue being more intellect word heavy, and perhaps a conversation could include more levels of how we communicate, and perhaps also action. How do you see that? Because as we say, the old adage, actions speak louder than words often. And do we follow through on our word, which then creates integrity and mutual understanding and trust in a conversation? So can you take it from here, if you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, well, in fact, if you get a thesaurus and you look at all the words that are connected with communication, talk, chat, gossip, wittering, conversation, dialogue, discussion, they all have a slightly different meaning. But fundamentally, if you come back to the triangle that I drew with communication, relationship, and connection, I think that as human beings, the most fundamental need we have is for connection. And I've read a great book which I recommend called Social by a guy called Matt Lieberman, who talks about that as being a fundamental human need, because without connection, we wouldn't survive. As babies, we are so dependent upon our parents or our caregivers for such a long time, because our brain is apparently only 25% developed when we're born, because otherwise we wouldn't get through the birth canal. So 3/4 of that growth happens outside the body. So man being a social animal, or humans being social, is absolutely fundamental to our survival. So rather than getting hung up on particular words, my thought is always, what is connection? How can I connect with this other person? I'm for example, I'm a Samaritans listening volunteer. Samaritans is a crisis helpline in the UK, mainly for people who are feeling in emotional distress or suicidal. And we are trained, even though we of course have these conversations anonymously. We are trained to connect with the caller by using all skills, but basically empathy and showing understanding, not judging. So you can, again, depending upon the situation, the question is how do you create value through meeting the needs of that situation and the needs of that other individual and your own needs. I mean, there's research that shows that there's great value in even fleeting moments of connection in your community. Smiling at the person who sells you a pint of milk, or nodding to the postman as you walk, or just smiling at your neighbor, because these are all little bits of social connection that help the social fabric. So when you're having a conversation with people, a conversation can be facetious, it can be light, it can be bantering, it can be about your favorite book or football team or whatever, or it can be about the meaning of life. But fundamentally, what is the nature of your connection with that other person, and what is the function of that communication in that relationship at that moment? So again, this is why we encourage people to practice on the small stuff. Sometimes the smallest of things can open the door to something more important, something bigger, some deeper connection. But personally, I couldn't live in that place the whole time, because I used to be a comedy writer. Things get too serious, I feel the compulsion to make a joke, But if I'm around jokey people the whole time, I feel the compulsion to actually let's get a bit serious, So it's in Man's Search for Meaning by gosh, I've forgotten his name now. Anyway, he asks the question, what's the best move in chess? And of course, there is no such thing as the best move in chess. There's only the best move for any particular situation. So the art or the skill of creative conversation is I suppose, just being aware, being prepared for what is the most appropriate way to create value in that moment. So because creative conversation isn't about being clever or imaginative or arty. It's about meeting needs, fundamentally the need for connection. I hope that long answer has touched a little bit on what you're asking.
No, I mean, yes, not no, yes, it has. Because it also answers a hidden question of mine. I've been thinking all along why the title was Demystifying Dialogue. Why do we worry so much about what we call it? Because what really meaningful to me is how we do it, no matter what we call it. So thanks for your answer.
Thanks, Eddie. So we've got two more, and Ole and then Noman. So Ole, over to you first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Eddie, thank you a lot for extremely interesting webinar. And I would like to ask the next thing. I really liked an example of the exercise you were talking about the first point of the list of 7 habits to creative conversation, the understanding first. And today I'm being invited as a guest lecturer to the university as a practicing mediator. And one of the topic is active listening. And I understand that today the youth in university has mostly a clip thinking. So it's a very short period of time they can concentrate. So I understand that 5 minutes is really long term for them. And I would like to clarify, if you please, of course, and take some elements of this exercise. I've heard that during some period of time, for example, 5 minutes, one person is being an understander. So is it about keeping silence and listening to the other person, and what exactly doing in this role?
Yeah. Okay. So you're asking about this 5-minute conversation and these two roles of understander and
yeah.
Okay. We brief the understander by saying there are 3 key elements. The first is focus. You absolutely have to give your full attention to the other person. The second element is to clarify, right? So this isn't about being silent. You're having a conversation, but you're seeking to clarify what the person is saying, and often the person isn't entirely clear about what it is that they want to say. So you obviously ask questions, or we have a fear of interrupting the person. But if you don't understand what someone is saying, I think it's completely legitimate to interrupt and say, hold on just a moment, I just want to check my understanding. So we also talk about nuggets of understanding. You feed a nugget of understanding, right? So you feel X because Y. You feel upset because your sister isn't talking to you anymore. I mean, that's a little nugget of understanding where you've got a fact and you have a feeling together, because facts and feelings are very, very powerful. So you're checking your understanding as you go, and then at the end you say, okay, let me see if I've got this straight, or let me see if I got this clear, and you give a little summary. You don't just repeat everything you've said, but you're sad that your sister hasn't spoken to you for 3 years, because you used to have a wonderful relationship in the past, but now she's married to this beast of a husband. She's changed, and you miss that connection that you had with her. I mean, for example. And when the other person says, that's absolutely right, or you bang on, you know that you're away to the races, because you are on the same page. And the key thing is that if you don't get it right, you've given them the opportunity to say, well, to correct you. Well, actually, her husband isn't a beast. He's quite a nice guy. I think there's something else going on. So this process of understanding is actually a collaborative process. You work with the other person, with the teller, to understand meaning, and help them often to understand what's going on.
So it's about 100% focus, clarifying by questions about the facts and feelings, and short summarizing at the end to get understanding if it's on the one wave, or another person can have an ability to correct if something was understood incorrect.
Yes, and you've done exactly what it says on the tin. Because
Thank you very much.
You have checked your understanding with me, and I've said yes, absolutely.
Yeah, super. Eddie, thank you very much.
Okay.
Arlene's one of our star alumni, great guy. Noman, another star alumni, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, hello everyone. Hello, Eddie.
Hello.
Thank you so much for the session. So my question is a bit a practical one. As a mediator who is interested in armed conflict mediation and negotiation, I want to ask that, since in armed conflict mediation or international disputes where conflict has transcended into a no return, so there is always this option of dialogue when mediators come in. I just want to understand the 7 habits of creative conversation that you have just shared. Can a mediator incorporate these 7 habits into that dialogue that he is currently organizing between the armed groups? And if so, how one can bring these 7 habits into practice? Since you said that you are a novelist as well, Ian said, just hypothetically create a scenario in which we as mediators can incorporate the 7 habits into our practice, into that dialogue and transition between the 7 habits and the dialogue. Can we work in a synergized form, or just we should more probably be focusing on the 7 habits? So I just want to understand, because since you said that dialogue and conversation are 2 different things, there is a difference between both. So if the dialogue is taking place, should we transcend towards the 7 habits? How to incorporate that? Just want to see how practically we can incorporate this into that scenario.
Right. Well, I don't have any experience of negotiating with armed groups, so this is perhaps something I would bat towards Ian. But I mean, in my mind, there's fundamentally no distinction, because it's a question of choosing what is appropriate. I mean, for example, in my mediation work, I use the 7 habits all the time, because I'm trying to clarify what someone has said. I'm trying to understand and be understood in return. But of course, that is a heightened particular situation, and the individuals themselves aren't using the 7 habits. Although the 7 habits are based upon what we do naturally when we're at our best. But unfortunately, we're often not at our best, particularly when we're in conflict with people. So, I mean, I would be fascinated to see how to incorporate this in those situations. I mean, certainly up in Newcastle, we are incorporating the 7 habits into the work that we do, because we are training people in community leaders in the 7 habits, so that they can then go and have more productive conversations within and between their communities. So it's kind of it's a work in progress is all I can say. But we've been like magpies. We have stolen from what we think is the best, and so it tends, I think, to transfer into other settings.
I think, Noman, thank you, Eddie, for that. I think, as you know, Noman, I've worked a lot with armed groups, and It's really interesting. Eddy first introduced me to this, I looked at his website on the 7 habits, and they do fit very well with the way that we actually work with groups. I mean, fundamentally, we all, as humans, we are here to survive, to grow, to prosper, and we communicate. And communication is the way that allows us to do that. And so I think these 7 habits, as Eddy says, to me, they're fairly instinctive. But to give a little bit of context, a while back when Eddy worked with us in the Ministry of Defence, we asked Eddy to do it because he thinks outside the box. He thinks practically, and he's got lots of different experiences. And what I'd written a piece of doctrine on understanding. So how do you, and the question was fundamentally that British intelligence was, or intelligence agencies around the world, were not understanding the context. They weren't aware of what the underlying issues were. And so I wrote this piece of doctrine on understanding, which was the sort of guideline to how to think and set the context for information intelligence. And then we asked Eddy to come in and do understand to prevent conflict, which is something I didn't have time to do myself. I was doing other stuff at the time. I really wanted somebody who would really challenge it and come in. Eddy did that brilliantly, and allowed us to think of things from very different perspectives. But I think that this excellent framework of creative conversation, it fits very well, because if you think about it, it's about understanding why things are happening. It's understanding what's happening now, who the main actors are, how you connect with them. Those actors often don't behave in the way we expect them to. So, being prepared for those difficult conversations. And this is ultimately is what we do in mediation, isn't it? This is the way that we go through. So it would be very interesting to develop that further as mediators, to put it in that kind of context. I really like, I like the way it's framed here. And particularly when I teach, as we often talk about, what are the 5 sort of great human needs, and Eddy's already mentioned the most important of those, which is connection, feeling belonging and connectedness. But also, of course, the other one, which is covered in here, is self-agency. It's having that agency that you are in charge of your own destiny, and you have a bit of security because you're connected to people, so you feel more secure in the way that you live in. So I do think this is a really excellent way of framing. I do commend it to you. It's very well thought out, and actually, to me, it really resonates very well indeed. So I think it is beholden me to thank you, Eddy, for an absolutely amazing session, really brilliant session.
Thank you.
And we'll be hearing, I'm sure, more of Eddy in the future. I really sincerely hope so. I do recommend you go to his website, and I do recommend you read his book as well, his and Peter's book, because it's really good. It's tremendous. And you'll learn a lot from that. So I strongly recommend that. So Eddy, thank you on behalf of all of us for a great and illuminating session.